Yeah, I'm starting right now. How how's it going, everyone? Devon Dupuis here. Want to show you guys some workflows with some 3D toolpaths and whatnot today. So we're gonna have Wayne on the keyboard, answering questions. If you guys have any questions, just type them into the chat, and we'll get to them as soon as we can. And then if there's any important ones, we'll kind of stop and go back and go through them. And then yeah, Wayne, did you want to mute yourself real quick? So, hopping into Fusion here, kind of what I've done is I have a setup here with some vices and some stock. And really, what I want to show today is a couple things. So, going through some workflows with the setup that I have here with the Kurt Vise, and then going through how I'm going to use the 3D toolpaths kind of to my advantage to help me get to the finish line a little bit quicker than I kind of normally would if I was just bringing a part into Fusion and just going through the motions of programming the part. So what I've done here is I have three parts that are kind of similar, and I'm just going to drag them into this document, and I will place each one of these in here. And this isn't really to show that you could do different parts inside of the same Fusion document here. What this is showing is just kind of how versatile this workflow is. So now that I have all three of my parts in here, I want to really start with the first one. So I'm going to close up my data panel real quick. I'm going to turn my other two parts off, and all these parts are kind of similar with their features. Now, there's some other stuff inside of this document that we'll go over in a second. And one other thing that I think is important to realize is when I go over to manufacture real quick, I do have a setup created, and I have some probing on my stock size, although it's way too big. And then I have some toolpaths here that are really empty. Um, so I'm going to pop back into design here. And what I'm going to do is I just have this container here that says place part here. And really, I kind of stole this from one of my buddies, Rob Lockwood. But this is just so we don't have to go into our setup every time and change what this part is. So it's basically just looking at this component, which is an empty container. And in this container, we're just going to place the part we're working with. So I'm just going to hit cancel on this. We're going to go back to design here. I'm going to take this and I'm just going to drag it into that kind of empty component so we can see it sitting right here. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to modify my stock a little bit. So I have some parameters that I made here. I'm going to say change parameters. And then you see I have some different, parallel heights and everything in here. So let's just make this a little bit smaller. We'll make this 6 inches. And that looks like it's probably a little bit too small. So we'll say 6.5. We'll make this Y like 3 inches. And hit enter, and then we can make our Z 2 inches. And that looks about good. If I want to change my parallels also, I just kind of built that in here. So we could say 1.375 and hit enter, and then those will adjust. So we have our part here. Probably make my stock a little bit wider. So let's say 3.5. And there we go. So I'm going to close this out and pop over to manufacture. Now that we're in manufacture here, we see we have all of our old toolpaths and our work coordinate system and everything like that. I'm just going to right click on this top level and hit generate. And that's going to generate these toolpaths for us. And we can take a look at some of these probing operations. We see that my probing in here, everything adjusted to my stock size that I have, along with my Z probing. My roughing is looking at my stock and my part. And then we'll talk about a little bit about what these toolpaths are kind of more at the end, but basically facing the part, finishing all the flats, doing the outside like 2D contour, doing any 3D machining, and then drilling of any holes. So this is all generated. We can right click on this and hit simulate. I'll turn the stock on and put some of my settings on here that I like. Material. That looks good. So we can play through this, and I'm going to play through it rather quickly, but we can see that I kind of captured all my intent with my tool paths to machine this part without making any selections. This is going through, facing the top, doing those chamfer, drilling those holes. Now they're not to size, but really the point of this isn't to get 100% finished part. What the point of this is really is to get really close to the end, right? Basically get you kind of 80% of the way there without really having to do much, because these are all kind of things that we'll do on, parts most of the time. If we don't need any of these, we could certainly just delete those toolpaths, but I'm going to continue walking through what this would look like on some of those other parts. So I'm going to close this out. Now remember, this is the same setup. I'm going to go back to design here. I'm going to take this component and I'm just going to drag it out. I'm going to turn that one off and I'm going to turn this one on. I'm going to drag this into our little container here, and looks like we're pretty good on size. Maybe I'll make the X a little bit bigger. So go into modify, change parameters. Let's make the X just 7 inches. And that looks good. We could make it not as thick, but we'll do that on another one. And we can come in here now and right click on this setup and just hit generate. This is going to generate kind of all the way through. We have that probing cycle that updated, our roughing and everything that updated, the facing, finishing of any of the flats, kind of the outside shape contour, any 3D stuff on there, and then drilling of any holes. We right click on this and we hit simulate. We can just play through this. Same thing. This is going to get us really close to where we need to be without having to do a lot of work or really make any selections. So this is doing all the 3D there, drilling of any of those holes, and we're pretty close to being done without having to do really any work or any selections there. Let's close this out. We'll go to the last part. I'm going to take this, just open it up, just drag it back to my top level there, turn that one off, we'll turn this one on, drag it into my little container. Let's modify the stock because it is too small. So we'll say 4.5, and that looks good. We'll hit OK. And then I'm going to go back into manufacture here, and we'll just right click on this and hit generate. While this is generating, we can look again. These have all been updated here to the new part and everything like that. We get some selections here. People are probably wondering how I did this, but it'll make sense in a little bit here. So let's look through this last part. We'll hit simulate, play through this, and remember this is again a different part. But because we kind of captured all of our intent with those 3D toolpaths, it makes it really easy for us to, just kind of interchange parts or have this kind of generic setup that we can just drop parts into. So this is doing, some 3D machining there, drilling of some holes. And I mean, we're really close to being done with this part without having to do, much of anything. So now what is all this, and really why did I kind of choose this topic to show you guys? Um, the reason I wanted to go through this is just because in here, I like to use 3D. I show a lot of customers, 2D adaptive, and really, it's not something that I ever used. If I wanted to do just kind of a single level adaptive, I always want to check my tool against the model. So I always tended to use the 3D adaptive. And really, with that 3D adaptive, there's a lot of kind of perks that we get with it because we are checking against the model and we are actively looking at the stock. Whereas opposed to in like a 2D adaptive, we really have to tell it where there's material, where there's not material, and we might not always get the selection that we want, and there's a lot of kind of fussing around with it. With 3D, I found that it's really easy to get what you need with just a couple clicks. Now really what I've done in here, just in my heights, I told on my adaptive here just to cut below the model by 100 thousandths. And then obviously we're leaving material on here. And this is normally, what you would do. But the reason I didn't choose a surface or any of these other selections in here is just because when I change these parts or drop these in there, I really don't want to make any selections, right? So I've kind of captured all my intentions using the workflow inside of Fusion to do this. And this one's pretty simple. You guys probably do this a lot. Obviously, parameters and everything in here. I have a tool that has an inch and a half length of flute. So I'm using those parameters in my settings here to kind of drive, what those steps and what the step downs and everything are going to be. We can close this out, and that one's not super intense, right? If we move over to this 3D facing, this really isn't 3D facing, but let's look at what it does. It is facing my part and just cutting to the top of the part. Now we can do this with a regular facing toolpath. We can say face, and if we hit OK, it's going to face the whole block including our stock. Now I kind of had a fancy 45-degree pattern there, so we could change this to 45 degrees, hit OK, but we'd still be cutting, the bounding box of our stock. So we'd have to go into geometry, make some selections here to kind of get this a similar output. Now, how did I get Fusion to do this without making any output, without making any selections? Um, all I did was in this 3D facing, this is really just a parallel toolpath, right? And all I did on the heights page is just I told it to cut to my and model top, and then sometimes you might have to put in like minus 0.001 1/10 or something to get this to work correctly, depending on your model. So if you have any fussing or whatever, I would just put a little small value in here, and then you can tell the top just a thou there. And then on geometry, I'm just telling it contact point bound, or we don't have to tell it contact point boundary, but this contact only is kind of important. And when this generates there, we see that it's really only making a toolpath where it contacts. So the last thing that I did just to go 45 degrees is obviously just change the path direction here. And then that really makes a facing toolpath kind of automatically over any part that's just touching that area, right? Um, Moving on, this flat finishing, this really isn't anything special. This is just the horizontal toolpath. So all I did was took horizontal. I already faced the top of my part, so I really don't want it to do that. So I'm just going to come in here and just go from the model top, and I'll maybe drop this down, you know, um, one thou. And then this is really going to give us kind of that same result. Now, I don't really like how this looks for, facing the top of this. So that's why I didn't use it. And that's why I chose to kind of go this route. But really all I did here was just do a horizontal toolpath. Um, Moving down here for the shape, right? I cut the outside of this part and the inside of this part. And this is really easy to do inside of Fusion. We can go to 2D contour and we can make these selections just by picking, kind of here and here, and we can get a toolpath, right? It's actually kind of the same toolpath that we got with with mine, except mine I didn't do any selections on. So really with this 3D shape profile, it's really nothing special. All I did was I just used the contour toolpath and I just gave this a big step down. So if we go in here and look at the settings under my passes, I just told it to take an inch and a half step down instead of traditionally where you'd take a bunch of little tiny cuts. And then I turned off the flat area detection because that'll give us kind of a little bit of noise. If we generate this with it on, we'll see there's kind of a lot more passes there. So really that's all I did to get rid of that was just uncheck this flat area detection. And then this is really going to, do that outside. The one last thing that I really didn't talk about was on the geometry here. Usually I just say tool outside a boundary on like a silhouette boundary. You can, if you're having trouble, give this just a bigger additional offset. So if we give this like 10 inches or something, we're really going to get the same result. We're just allowing the tool on the silhouette here to go outside that boundary by that amount, but it still has to, contact the part. Moving on from there, this angle finishing. So I mean, this is basically anything that's not flat or not straight, 90 degrees with our z-axis in the machine. And all this is just if we come in here and edit this, this is basically just the pocket clearing strategy. So this is really a basic kind of traditional toolpath. And all I did in here was just I went into geometry. I turned on rest machining. I gave it a little bit additional offset just to, get the amount of cuts that I wanted. And then in passes here, I just kind of put in what I want my kind of resolution or my step down to be to get kind of that look. So really with this with that rest machining, we could turn on couple things in here, but with this rest machining we're basically putting it at this point in the program, so it's not machining anything that hasn't that has no material left on it. So everything that has been machined isn't getting machined, and then anywhere where there's like kind of material or cusps left, this is going to come in and kind of 3D machine that. And really, if this isn't giving you any generation or is actually coming up with um, toolpath out of date here or no data, you can just delete this and remove this from your setup because this is something we can use kind of going from part to part. Another thing that I did here with the drilling, this is basically just using a different type of selection. So typically with drilling, we're coming in here and we're actually selecting the cylinders. Under the geometry here, I just put in a diameter range. Obviously, I have a tool that I'm working with here, 5/16 drill, but I'm just looking at a couple different, with a diameter range here, and it's actually looking at the part and finding all of those features on the part. The last thing, and then these are just obviously duplications of the ones that I did before. So at this moment, I guess we'll stop and kind of take any questions. Wayne, do you have anything that popped up on your end that we could dive into a little bit deeper? Gotcha, gotcha. So I'm getting from Wayne that there's not too many other additional questions right now. I'll talk about kind of a couple of things that I did because I know there might be some curiosity towards that. All these parts kind of came in the same orientation. This is just my kind of world or my root level origin here. If I come over here and I open any of these other parts, the reason they kind of came in the right spot is just because their root origin is in that same location. So when I dragged them into Fusion, they just ended up in that spot. Um, and that's why they look like they're in the same position there. Now, one of the things that's obviously really cool about this is if we take all of these parts out, and we'll leave one of these in here, and we'll work with this one. Um, but we can take these parts out, and here I'm going to take them all out, delete, and we'll drag this one back in here. If this came in kind of out of position, and let's just do that. We can put this over here. This is the way I like to work with parts inside of Fusion. I don't like to be able to edit or modify the part that I'm actually working on, so that's why I have a linked part in here. Um, and what we could do is just take this component and inside of Fusion, we could just drag this to kind of where it needs to be. Um, and let's just come in here and we'll put on a move copy. I'm going to just move it kind of sideways a little bit. Just move this around and I'll just drop this down a little bit. So really, wherever we kind of position this part in space here, we're gonna be able to generate the toolpath. So if I'm having a hard time positioning a part or seeing something in there, we can just kind of use this setup here, and then we'll just take this part and just drag it into that container. We could say capture position, obviously, because we moved it. And then when we go into our manufacturer here, even though this part's kind of sideways, we can hit generate. This is obviously going to generate any of the stuff that didn't move, but like for roughing our part out with our part now sideways, if that's how we wanted to do it, we just generated the toolpath like that and we didn't make any selections. So like I said, with any of my other stuff, the facing or finishing of any of the flats on here, all this stuff is based off of the part. This outside kind of, 2D profile that we have here. It's not like we're going through and, changing this or selecting any of these. We're getting this output pretty clean just by doing the workflow that I have here. Um, the other thing we can go over on this kind of live stream here if we don't have any other questions is how I got this vise, why I use this vise. I use this vise because this is kind of what I work with in the real world. Now I would imagine a lot of you guys who are on the kind of hobbyist to more professional level are using Kurt vices. We can get these from Kurt's website, and let's go through kind of how we can walk through a little bit kind of how I set this up. Now I know there's a bunch of people here who work at Autodesk. We all kind of set these up a little bit differently, and this is the way that I do it. So if we just pop into here, We can open up Kurt's website here. Depending on what kind you have, you can just type in. The more classic is going to be the D688. This is going to be kind of your more traditional, not the newer style vise. And you can scroll down to the bottom here, go to the CAD here and pick what you want. I'm going to grab the DX6 because that is the newer version of that vise. And we can just click this DX6 crossover vise. We can scroll down to 2D CAD. I'm just going to click this. I prefer the step. It's just easier to work with, I think. And then I don't do it zipped, so I'm just going to hit download. This will download it for me. And then we can hop into Fusion here. I'm just going to go over here to data panel. We can say upload, and then we'll pick that. We can upload it in here. And this should upload fairly quickly. We could also just open this straight from our computer because it is a step file. So we can let that one upload, and we can also come over here and just say open from our computer. Fusion works really good as like a file, translator, just because we have a lot of file types that we can work with. So we can grab that, and this will open up kind of right away. Now all the bodies and everything are in here. So what I do for this workflow is just say create components from bodies. And then what I'm going to do is just come up here and I'm going to make a couple empty components. So to me, I basically have the base and then I have the movable jaw over here. And I don't animate everything. I just kind of do this the stuff that I want to work with all the time. So we can come over here and say new component, and I'm going to just call this base. And then I'm going to come over here and we'll reactivate this and make another new component, and we can just call this the MJ, or the moving jaw, and hit OK. So we have all those pieces in here, and then what I'm going to do is just kind of go through and grab the things. So I don't need this. So when we click it, it highlights it over here in the browser. We can hit delete, which will take it out of there. And then we can just come through and highlight some of these. So I'm just hitting control and then just going through here and looking at the components that I'd want to have in my base. And we can take this hardware. And then take all these and just drag them into that base just to kind of clean it up a little bit. And then this should be all stuff that is for our sled, for our moving jaw. We can put those in there. And then what I do when I'm making this a manufacturing file, like a file that I'm going to work with, like those templates, I'll position this base or kind of everything here. So I might take all of this stuff and kind of move it around. Um, but I'll usually position the base of this, and we can do that a couple different ways. We can click it here and see it. A lot of people ground this. That's not really my preferred method. I want to have some sort of relationship established inside of Fusion. So normally what I'll do is you have to make sure that capture design history is turned on here. And then because if I have it in the position that I want it, I would just say as built joint. And then I'll actually take the base and just connect it kind of to that top level. And then that'll allow us to kind of animate everything here. Now, everything pretty much in this folder is all rigid, so we can actually just take all these and right click and say rigid group. And then all that stuff is rigid there. So this stuff still moves, and I'm just going to hit Control Z to kind of undo that. And then I will say, let's grab these. I'm just holding Shift to select all those, and then I'm going to right click and I'm going to make these all a rigid group. And then what we can do is just say, we can make a joint, and we'll say as built joint, and we can make it from the base to like this sled here. And then we want it to be able to slide. So I'm just going to choose the screw here. And then we see it sliding. So now this moves here. Now we can manually adjust this. We can position this however we want. Also, the joint's going to show whatever that distance is. I just put it like this because I'm actually going to let my stock kind of drive that. So I want to make a couple other things here. I want to make some parallels and a stock block. So with my top component activated here, I'm just going to say new component, and we can call this parallel. And then I'm just going to come into my parameters and make a parallel height. We can just call this 1.5 for now. We'll hit OK. And then we're going to want to do some ones for the stock. So let's add those in here now. So we'll say this. So stock X. We'll put this as 8. We'll put this one on. We'll put this one at 6. And then I need a Z. So we have all those in there for the parameters. I'm just going to hit OK. I don't really need a bunch of sketches. I am active here, so I'm going to be putting whatever sketches in there. But I'm just going to use one sketch to make this, or we could even use this box, the like a primitive tool here. So we'll just say capture position. I'm going to pick the plane I want it on. I'll just kind of drag it out. Kurt Vise is 6, and we'll make these 125. So 0.125. And then for this height here, I'm just going to type in that parallel height, and I'm going to use that to drive what that height is. I want to have another one of these, but we can copy this later, or we can copy it now. So we can say copy. I'm going to right click and say paste. The paste new command here, let me right click and do this again. If I say paste new, it's actually going to make another instance of that component that doesn't reference the original. So paste is actually going to make two of the same parallels. And then if I go in here and change the parallels, they're actually on top of each other. Um, if I go in here and change those parallels, they're actually both going to change in height. So if I make these both 1 inch, you'll see they both change. If I pasted new, the second one that I pasted in there wouldn't have changed. We'll turn these off, and then we can come in here and do the same thing. We can just use a primitive again, and we'll draw right here. And then we can so right now we'd be looking at like our x-axis. So I'm just going to type in stock, and I'll use stock X. We can hit tab to switch over. We'll use stock Y for this, and then hit enter. And then for this, we'll use stock Z. And then that's going to give us that. I did kind of create that wrong. I didn't make a component first. We can pretty easily just say create components from bodies. And then here, let's just double check and make sure this still drives it. It does not. So let's undo that. And then we'll say create new component. Break in rule number 1. So now that we have our stock here, we'll just do that again. And now we should be good. I'm going to change, I like to change the opacity on my stock just because I'm going to end up putting a part in there. And then we'll activate this top level again so we can see this is kind of clear, and we got that. So what I'm going to do is just kind of set up this assembly, and then this assembly is really going to drive how big this is. So I'm going to come here and I'm going to say joint. We'll capture the position because I moved it. I'm going to go to the bottom here, and I want to grab kind of this little node. Where is it at? Right here in the center, and then on the edge, and I need to get close, get my joint coin correct. We can come in here, and these parallels I think don't have a chamfer, so we can come and like underneath here. Let's do this. We'll hit cancel real quick. I'm going to double click on this, right click, and I'm going to use the isolate feature, and then we'll turn my parallels back on, and then we can use that same joint to get this correct without having to go through a bunch of messy visibilities. And we want the motion here to be rigid. This is obviously the new kind of joint type. We want to flip this, and then now we're in the correct position there. I'm going to hit OK. We can take everything in here and in the base. You just right click and say show all components. And then from here, we'd have kind of a similar issue here. So I'm going to double click on this, and I'll hit isolate. And then we'll turn my other parallel back on, both parallels back on. We'll hit joint here, come down and joint this to that. We'll just flip that. and then those are in the correct position. We can just come over here and show all the components again. And then for my stock here, we'll grab this, and then these will be a little bit easier. We'll zoom in, we'll place this right here. And then over here, we can move this just out of the way. We can capture that position, and then we'll use that same kind of joint tool. We want to move. Want to have this come to here. And so now we made the joint and everything, got everything together here. And now when we change the parameters of this, we make our Y be like 3 inches. It should update everything. It looks like it doesn't, so I messed up something with this component here, but pretty much that's how you go over this. Wayne, do we have any other questions? Um, Mr. Lockwood, yeah. Yep, yep. Oh, sorry. Not everybody can hear me. I was just getting some feedback there from Wayne. So, yeah, really appreciate you guys' time. We'll probably close this out. If you guys have any other questions, feel free to reach out. And thanks.